How did you digest that first round of the NFL draft, being a former tight end? Only one tight end went off the board in round one, but it was a really good one. He's not just a tight end. He's more of a hybrid in Kyle Pitts. What do you think of that pick at 4, seeing that he played your position?
I love that pick. I mean, if I was a GM, I would probably have been looking at him as the first pick overall, and I'm being a little facetious, but he is, over the last 10 years of me evaluating tight ends, I talked to my buddy who's been evaluating tight ends for 34 years, unanimous number one guy at the position during that time of evaluation. He is a special talent. He can beat your number one corner. He can block a defensive end. He can do it all. He's a unicorn. I think Atlanta got a great weapon.
You know, Logan, you had a great career, but you weren't drafted. I'm wondering what it was like during that period of time. Did you think you might be drafted? Like, what did you do during those days?
Oh, yeah, so I think when I was getting drafted, it was one day, you know what I mean, or like 2 days. So it wasn't like this whole big drawn-out process. But, yeah, so there was, I signed with my agent. He kind of said, there's a pretty good chance you won't get drafted. And based on kind of my injury history and some other things that had gone on with the coaching changes at UCLA, I kind of knew that I probably wasn't going to be drafted. On the last day, 6th, 7th round, I was getting calls from teams saying, hey, we're going to pick you with the next pick. They picked somebody else. And then kind of went into the unrestricted free agent period after the draft, and I got a whole bunch of calls, which was very flattering. But also I kind of felt like it was an advantage because I got to pick kind of the best situation for me and the best opportunity in terms of numbers and in terms of scheme. And I was able to pick Washington over San Diego, which was kind of tough for me because I'm from California. So I kind of wanted to stay close to home, but I felt like Washington gave me the best opportunity to kind of make the team and make some money, and that decision looked like it was the right one. So,
do you remember who was the biggest liar to you on the phone? Was there a GM who said, we're going to take you in the 6th round, and then they just bypassed?
I mean, if I was talking to a GM, I would have been super flattered. I'm talking to the third regional scout from wherever they're from, some guy who's just out of college being like, hey man, we really like your tape, and as a player, as a college player, you have no idea. But now, after playing in the NFL and understanding the front office structure a little bit more, you realize you're talking to someone who's a little bit more than an intern, and that's fine. They gotta triage their time like everybody else.
Out of the 5 quarterbacks that were taken in the first round, Lawrence, Wilson, Lance, Fields, Jones, do you have question marks on one or a couple of those guys?
Yeah, I think a lot of them have question marks. So I think the first 2 guys are. I think one of the reasons Lawrence is the consensus number 1 and was picked first overall is because he had the fewest question marks. I think he is the most consistent of those 5 guys, and I think that's why you pick him number 1. He's the least amount of risk, very high ceiling, very high floor. You feel good about him. Zach Wilson, I'm surprised people weren't talking more about his kind of issues, but again, very talented, kind of Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers type arm talent, makes plays off schedule, kind of rolling in with the new iteration of the NFL quarterback. And then I think after that, those 3 guys that were taken, you all have some bigger question marks associated with them. Trey Lance only threw 310 passes or 311 passes at North Dakota State, so his body of work is not very comprehensive, but great leadership qualities, great runner, really expands that Kyle Shanahan offense. I think we all saw how good that offense could be with a running quarterback when Robert Griffin was here in 2012. And it's scary to think about what he's going to be moving forward under Shanahan's tutelage. But then you go to a guy like Jones, and Jones is kind of the opposite of the way the position's going. He's more traditional. He's a true pocket passer. He has some talent. He has some processing traits that make you really excited. But, I think his floor is pretty low. His ceiling's pretty high, but I think he doesn't give you anything extra outside. Like those other 2 guys, Lance and Fields, give you some running ability, which is pretty scary, and at a bare minimum makes your offense better in that way. Jones doesn't have that, so it's concerning. And then Fields, I think, is one of the things that in my evaluation of him that made me really worried was how he processed stuff. And that's something when I talk to people repeatedly, that's something that came up a lot. And then to be totally fair, I think Dwayne Haskins and how he fared in the NFL was a big mark on him, even though it has nothing to do with him. A lot of guys brought that up when I spoke with them about him. They said, well, Ohio State quarterbacks don't do really well in the NFL, and they would always bring up Haskins. So if I'm Fields, I'm gonna punch Haskins in the face when I see him probably. So,
how difficult is it for you to? I mean, you were a tight end, not a quarterback, but how difficult do you think it is for that processing ability to improve? Is that tough?
I think it can be really challenging, and it just depends on what they're asking him to do. That's the hardest thing in the evaluation process, in my opinion. You can see what they're looking at. You can see kind of the concept. You can say this is how it should be read or read at an NFL level. But what are they asking him to do? How are they asking him to do it? And maybe he's got this tremendous ability to process stuff, but they just didn't ask him to do it. And so maybe he gets to the NFL and he picks it up like that, or maybe he really struggles with it like Dwayne did. So I think it's really hard, and that's why this process is so challenging, because you're grading what you see on tape, you're grading the interviews, you're grading the physical qualities, and it's got to be, you kind of got to aggregate all that data into one thing and kind of come up with what you think this guy's going to be. So I think Fields could be an outstanding football player if he can get that stuff corrected. And there are guys who correct it relatively easily, and there are guys, on the other hand, who don't, and they struggle, and those guys are well documented. So
it's the hardest position to evaluate. They're only, right? Everybody does
hardest position to play.
At an elite level. You swing and miss every year, so it's very difficult. And that being said, Washington clearly didn't feel like they felt comfortable enough to move up, maybe like the Bears did or whatever, and swing on one of them. So they hung in there. And I'll be honest, prior to the draft, and I was very public about it, I said I would like I'm no expert. I'm just look at it for an hour. But I was like, I like this linebacker from Notre Dame. He didn't get selected yet. He looks like he's more of a tweener. They went with Jamin Davis, and the more you look at him, man, he's raw, but I totally understand why they made that selection.
Yeah, I think, I think the NFL draft's a really funny thing, in my opinion. It becomes like this popularity contest. Like, who have the fans heard more of? Who have evaluated? Who are they talking about more? And I think when you look at JOK's film, you say, he's really talented, but where does he fit? And you look over the past couple of years, like Simmons, for example, who got drafted to Arizona, is a great example of this. Guys who don't have a defined position, NFL teams have a hard time using them, right? Because does he play safety? Does he play linebacker? If he plays linebacker, he's only 6'1". How does he fit in there? I like this pick a lot better for a true linebacker. I think this guy, Jamin Davis, covers extremely well. I think he does a really good job in the run game. He reminds me a ton of Lavonte David. Like, it's crazy. So, like, that is kind of the standard for the position now. Get a linebacker who's rangy, can cover, good length, disruptive, good ball production, like when the ball's in the air. So I love this pick. I think it's going to be great. I think it just makes that linebacking crew for the Washington football team way more athletic. It allows you to move some pieces around and get the most athletic three on the field. He can play on the ball. He can play in space. It just gives you a ton of flexibility. I love the pick. I know some people didn't like it, but just if you look at his tape, you look at his production, you look at his pro day numbers, I think it's going to be an awesome fit for the Washington football team.
Talking to our pal Logan Paulsen, former tight end for the Washington football team, who you can listen to tonight on Team 980 for draft coverage. One thing we were talking about earlier was, what do you do with Landon Collins? And there's some talk that Landon Collins might try a position switch to linebacker. I'm wondering, in your opinion, how easy is that, or how difficult is that to move a guy from safety? He's been a safety, since college, at least probably his whole career, to move him to linebacker.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways you could do it. You could say, you're going to be a conventional, first and second down linebacker, 4-3 linebacker, and that transition is going to be really tough. But if you look at, like, maybe taking him and saying you're going to be in our sub package, which now is on the field approximately 60 to 65% of the time for most teams, then you're in a ballpark that's probably much more conducive to his skill set, right? You allow him to cover in a way that he is more comfortable, that he's more athletically suited to. You allow him to play the run in a way against not like super heavy run looks like fullbacks. You're getting, kind of simpler structures, stuff that he's very familiar with, some stuff that he's probably very comfortable with. Like, you see how productive he is against the run, especially early last year, like before he got hurt. He's a very, very, very productive run player. And I think that the switch and the transition is definitely doable for him. He's just got to buy in, and they got to do it the right way. They can't just throw him in there on first and second down and be like, hey, man, go get it. They got to kind of integrate him in the scheme in a way that fits his his play history and fits his general athleticism. So I think it's definitely doable. It's about whether the player wants to buy into it and how the team does it. Because I've seen teams do it and they do it effectively, and I've seen teams do it and they do it terribly, and then the guy's out of the league. So I think it really depends on both of those factors.
Logan, do you see Washington spending a second-day pick on a tight end? And if they do, who do you like? I mean, Hunter Long out of BC seems to be the top guy left on the board after Pitts. And then you have Freiermuth
Freiermuth's a stud, I'm telling you.
Penn State. And then Tommy Tremble of Notre Dame seem to be the top three available.
Yeah, so to me, Tommy Tremble is more of a fullback. I love Tommy Tremble's tape. I think he's Kyle Juszczyk from San Francisco. Like, he's a guy who's extremely physical in the run game, but off the ball, right? Kind of in space, playing that fullback, that F position for the offense. I love him, but I just don't know how he fits with Washington. And those other two guys, Freiermuth and Long, I think are good players. I don't think they're great players. I think they're kind of kicked up the draft boards a little bit right now because there's nobody else. Like, this is a very, 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 very thin tight end class. And what I would like to see the Washington football team do is I'd like to see them address some other needs first, probably before tight end. I think there's going to be some really good tackles here in the second and third round. I think there's going to be some good safeties here. I think, if you want a game-changing skill player at receiver, there are guys in this space that do that. I think it's about assessing the value of the tight end position and what you need right now. Like right now they've got Logan Thomas. They've got this kid, Samis Reyes, who I think could be very productive in the NFL. I think they need a guy who's going to be getting down and dirty and doing and filling that sprinkle role from last year, a guy who's good in pass protection, a guy who can put his hand down on first and second down and give defensive ends a hard time. And I don't know if either one of those guys fit that bill exactly because, Long is to me, he reminds me of Kyle Rudolph a little bit. Not a great blocker. He's okay. He's got the build for it, but he just didn't embrace that role when he was at Boston College. And then Freiermuth is, again, okay in the run game, a better receiver than people think. Reminds me a little bit of Goddard from Philadelphia, but not as good in the run game and not quite as explosive in the pass game. So I think those guys are good players. I just think there might be better value at other positions.
Yeah, can you bring up more about that Reyes? I think you've been asked about him quite a bit. Tell our audience, because he kind of just came out of nowhere, right? A basketball guy,
right.
Hadn't really played in football, but had been training. I'm not even sure if you'd been involved in training with him. But talk about him and then how difficult that transition will be for him having not actually put on pads before. We've seen basketball guys do it before and turn in their pads like a week later. It is.
Right.
And then what about a guy like Tebow?
Just watching it.
You should throw in Tebow into the mix.
I definitely want to ask about Tebow, too.
Yeah. So I think, Samis is a guy that I met about a year ago, actually, through this guy, Alex Harris, who runs basketball camps out in the area here. He said, I think he can play, and then you meet him, and he's probably one of the most physically impressive human beings you've ever seen. He's 6'7", right. He's 260. He puts on muscle like it's going out of style. He runs well. He jumps well. I think he's tested the highest for his size of any tight end in the history of the NFL. Like, he's 40-inch vertical, 4.6
right.
40, great three-cone, all that stuff. And then the other thing that I think is most important about him is he's a really smart guy. He's an econ major. He's learned multiple languages. He's from Chile. He's an immigrant. He's got this tremendous work ethic. So I think if anybody can do it, he can do it. It's just about, again, how the team's going to use him, what they're going to ask him to do, because it's super easy for guys to come in and run routes. There is some nuance and some technicality to it, but you're not having to
right.
physically move people the way that, if you use them the way teams have used Jimmy Graham historically, they don't ask him to do a ton of challenging stuff in the run game, and he's been very successful with that. I think if you could find a role and a niche like that for him within the offense, he could be very productive this year. And then you talk about it, you mentioned Tebow and how tough that transition can be. It's just a different physicality. It's a different type of contact that you get play in and play out. And obviously quarterbacks aren't used to it and basketball players aren't used to it. So those transitions from a physical standpoint and a contact standpoint can be extremely difficult, even though a guy like Samis has all the physical tools you need.